Always a tough act to follow Steven Spielberg after a presentation like that. So, it's probably pretty common knowledge that both Tim Jacklin and myself, we've probably both got scars on our back over the stocking issue. And quite frankly, I'm sick to death about talking about it. But it's obviously a really hot topic in the angling press, and it has been for a long time now. And when Tim and I are out and about doing our advisory visits, we do obviously get asked. We get asked quite a lot about trout stocking and trout stocking issues, and Simon quite rightly early on suggested that we needed to have a position statement. We're not a regulator, we're not the Environment Agency, and even though Tim and myself were fairly heavily involved in the early days of the trout and grading strategy when we were part of the EA, we're not regulators, and the Wild Trout Trust is a very broad church, and a lot of people have got very mixed and different views about how you go about ensuring that our rivers are vibrant and full of trout. So I'm not going to dip too much into the science of trout stocking and genetics, because we're really fortunate today in having Andy Ferguson and Eric Paspool here to talk to us about some of the science that underpins the policy that the agency came out with. I'm not going to refer to it as our trout stocking policy, because we don't do policy, but we certainly will obviously have a position, and that position was formulated by the conservation team. So okay, so what happened with the Environment Agency was in 2003 they published a sort of consultation document, and basically made that statement that there's mounting evidence that interbreeding between domesticated farm trout and wild fish can lead to lower fitness and survival amongst the offspring. Obviously, classic slide there, and the thing about domesticated farm trout, what do we actually mean by that? Well, I'll try and explore that a bit, and I'm sure the science talks that we have will help to explain that. But two slides of trout. Obviously, fish farmers select trout on aesthetics and growth. The right-hand fish there are really, you probably recognise, that's the stocky. Although that's a wild fella, still quite a plump chap. But trout farmers don't produce fish to have truncated, stumpy fins and shortened tails. They try and produce them with fantastic fin quality. They try and produce them so that they're actually the epitome of what we all dream about as being the perfect trout, because that's what they've got to go on. Selection, it's about growth, fin quality, aesthetics. The trouble is, it doesn't take into consideration all of the other things a wild trout needs to survive. And I thought about a sort of fairly simple slide. Now, Christina, don't be offended by this slide, okay? Because if anyone's ever phoned up Christina at home, you may have heard one of these chaps yapping in the background. Sorry, barking in the background. It probably took human beings several hundred years to get from that creature to that creature, and we can all recognise, the wolf and the papillon. Probably the papillon, if you turfed it out into the Arctic tundra, wouldn't survive more than 24 hours. Does very well in Christina's kitchen. Now, when we look at trout, we just see trout, but obviously, trout require a whole lot of inbuilt characteristics to survive and flourish in the wild. And, you can't see those with your eyes. I put this little slide up. Now, I can see someone slightly smirking about that trout, because it was caught by someone sitting very close to me last week, but I was sworn to secrecy because it's a very, very big wild fish. You wouldn't say it's the most beautiful fish you've ever seen in the world, but it is a wild fish. And so I won't tell anyone who caught it, will I, Tim? But the thing about wild trout is that the natural selection process has given them the ability to avoid being eaten. To actually be able to exploit, wild food. Obviously, fish that are more fertile, come through. And with any luck, we hear an awful lot about climate change. You know, if we can keep our rivers good enough and fit enough for long enough, with any luck, we believe that, you know, some trout will obviously also acclimatise to climate change. They're amazingly versatile, successful species, and they can thrive given half a chance. But stocking with fertile fish obviously has, if you believe the science, and I do, have an adverse effect on them. So the Environment Agency obviously has produced this incredibly controversial policy, and they've stated that by 2015 all farm trout stocked to rivers will have to be sterile, all female triploids, or they will have to be fish derived from local broodstock schemes. I'm going to talk a little bit about local broodstock schemes because, again, every time I go out at the moment, it's the hot topic. And we've got people in this room that are involved and engaged in wild broodstock schemes. And obviously, for some situations, if you need fertile trout to stock into a river, you're going to need some fish that can spawn. And Paul talked a little bit about rivers like the River Cray and the River Wandle. Well, you know, we're not going to kickstart a population there using triploid brown trout. We need fertile fish. So again, we need to think very, very carefully about how we do that. So I thought, rather than get into trouble and give my spin on the WTT position, I'll take this straight from the website. There's a couple of bullets, there's one more. I won't read them out, you can read them for yourself. But the central planks, we think, are all about, you know, it's about habitat. If you want wild trout, you want habitat. That's what we do, that's what we're good at, that's our bread and butter. So you can't ignore that. There's no point in putting fertile fish into a river thinking that you're going to get, you know, lots of natural production if you haven't got the three planks that support them. That's water quality, water quantity, habitat quality. But what we do say, and we recognise that not all of rivers support, you know, have those three central planks, and many rivers and many fishing clubs, you know, do rely on some stocking. We recognise that. But we think wild trout first, second and third, you've got to protect your wild trout stocks, and you have to think about those when you engage in a stocking programme. Incidentally, I put that slide in there because that particular trout there, that's my fishing rod and my net. There's been a lot of talk in the angling press about sort of like, you know, these sterile triploid fish, how people are actually going to mistake them for sea trout and you know, knock sea trout on the head because of these silvery triploids that are going in. That is a triploid brown trout, and I know it is because I scooped it out of the fish farm with that net to get the photograph. I knew it was an all-female triploid trout. So I think you'll agree, hardly a bar of silver. I think this is one of the bullets that I want to sort of like talk a little bit more about, and that's this idea of using a wild broodstock, because we've said that, yeah, we're supportive of that, but I think the key part of this is, you know, use wild broodstock whenever that is possible. And it's gathered such a lot of steam and momentum, and I think, in fairness to the agency, I think when they suggested wild broodstock schemes, I don't think they envisaged that people would grab those as an opportunity just to stock rivers to augment catch. Yes, you need fertile fish to kickstart a population, but do you need fertile fish to cast a fly for and to catch a fish and to, in some cases, in many cases, take home and eat? Well, you know, perhaps you don't. I think when you ask people about, you know, we engage in people about, you know, trout stocking, it seems such an obvious question. Why, you know, why are you actually stocking trout? And there's a lot of answers to that. Some of them are as simple as the fact that, well, actually, we stock trout because we've been stocking trout for 150 years, and that's what we do, without giving any sort of wider thought to, you know, the wild component of the stock. Some of these things are obvious. Obviously, you know, yeah, if you've got people that like to catch and take and kill trout, well, fine. You know, maybe some stocking is required to underpin that, you know, particularly if you haven't got much wild production.